Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I am delighted to share this conversation with you. It is with my dear friend Mary Schuch. Some of you may know Mary very well, and if you maybe didn't know this about me, I have another podcast with Mary called My Life is Better with You in It. And I feel like that should already give you a certain level of understanding of like my relationship with Mary. Mary and I talk a lot, pretty much all the time. And I feel like we've been walking a lot of many different paths together, or at least alongside one another. Mary was also one of my first guests when I first started this podcast. And you can go back to that conversation and kind of feel into how our connections and our conversations have evolved. As is often the case with someone that you spend a lot of time with, sometimes we just let go, and I think this is what is so incredible about Mary's presence. There's a way in which, to me, Mary is walking the path of improvisation. Truly. And there's something about the path of improvisation that is not easy. There's something about the path of improvisation that's really, really scary. Because what happens when you're on the path of experimentation and improvisation is you can't really plan ahead, and there's something so potent about people who are on this path. There's something that I think you can kind of feel on a visceral level when you meet them. And to me, Mary is just one of those people. And in some ways, I can look back at my friendship and my collaborations with Mary as essentially a masterclass in allowing myself to be exactly who I am in that moment in like a deep embodied way. And so, as you may have seen from the title of this episode, I think our conversation is really about how experimentation is a practice, and one that we can devote ourselves to, and one we can get better at, and one that as much as we can get better at it, we'll probably still be learning something new. It's still going to surprise us. It's still going to sweep us off our feet. And so I'm so excited to be presenting this conversation with Mary with you, and I hope that you're getting something out of it. If you would like, I would highly recommend that you check out our podcast together, My Life is Better with You in It. I will link it in the show notes below, and also I deeply encourage you to check out all of Mary's offerings. Before we get to the conversation, let me read you Mary's bio. Mary Schuch, she, her, is committed to showing up for the experience of belonging in a human body. In this lifetime, Mary is steadily walking a resonant path and striving to remember the inherent relationality of all beings. Informed by her upbringing as a homeschooled pastor's kid and the eighth of 11 siblings, Mary is reclaiming her right to exploration and education through meditative, multidisciplinary living. She is devoted to practices incorporating writing, music, art, bread making, astrology, movement, and being outdoors. A beneficial byproduct of years of manual labor, Mary's reverence for contemplative time has grown through work in the gardens, kitchens, and on a commercial lobster boat and oyster farm. She is originally from the Chicago area and currently lives on an island in Maine. Connect with Mary on Instagram at Mary Schuch and book a reading with her. All right, here's my conversation with Mary Schuch. Welcome to the podcast, Mary.
Hi,
am
Jonathan.
so excited to have you here.
I'm already interrupting you.
That's Uranus on the ascendant currently.
They said it would be erratic.
Yes. Well, I want to introduce you to folks listening. I had you over on the podcast as one of the very first interviews. The very first batch of interviews, you were one of the few people that I rushed towards, and I was like, Mary, would you record a conversation with me? And then we started our own podcast, and so much has happened. Like I can't even, like I feel like we would be here all day if we talk about all that has happened since our last conversation. So this is what I will say. Mary is a dear friend of mine, and I feel like we've been walking a specific path together that also orients towards witnessing our individual paths, but there's like a convergence to our paths. Um, and I consider you a kin. I consider you a dear friend, and I consider you someone I admire and look up to, Mary. So thank you for existing.
Well, now I'm like blushing over here. Likewise, Jonathan. Yeah, it feels like so much time has passed, but also that we're kind of like back in the same meeting point. Like our friendship is very much like, let's converge and check in. It almost feels like a long-term diary or something that we have
I like that.
together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just a little signpost every time. And so I'm really excited to be back here because early on you were like at this point of just starting and wondering what this would look like. And I love listening to your podcast. And I often just feel like, oh, I haven't seen Jonathan in a while. Like maybe we should. I'm like, I'll just put on an episode and feel like we're hanging out and I can stop you at any point.
Yeah, true.
No. I already feel like I've been mean to you. I'm like, am I mean?
If it's someone's first time hearing your voice and being introduced to Mary, how would you introduce yourself today?
Today I would say I am a creative person. A writer. Yes. Thank you. A writer. I don't know. I feel like I'm embarking on some new artistic pursuits. I feel like I'm like, oh, I don't want to say it on this podcast because what if the next 100 episodes I'm back here and I'm like, I didn't paint at all. But I'm like, is this the week? Is this the Jupiter, Uranus in my first house situation to be like, is this the time that I just fully commit to a practice with painting? Because I don't know. I look over the last few years and I have various practices. I'm also a bread baker. That's very important to me. I'm an astrologer. There's that too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like, do you feel it's just so funny to try to say this to you because I know we're talking to other people, but
yeah. I hear you.
Oh wait, and I have a podcast with my friend Jonathan.
That's right. So for anyone listening, if you are not following our podcast, My Life is Better with You in It, you are missing out. Because what I like to say, Mary, when I introduce that podcast is the version of me that's hanging out with you is always infinitely more fun than the version of me that's
Mm.
just by myself. So,
And
yeah,
I would say that I'm a sweeter person with you.
I like
Like
that. We
I,
find convergence. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like
yeah,
I'm more unhinged and maybe you're more sweet.
yeah, I'm more sweet, a little softer, less aggressive. Um, yeah, and I think our friendship, like that's another space where we can we can talk about anything anywhere, and we
Mm,
do, like
we
all,
do.
but having those times to check in, it feels like my relationship to that project, even when it's like, oh, time has passed and we
Mm,
haven't worked on it or done something, it's like that doesn't mean that the relationship to the project isn't still evolving. And so there is development,
right.
even in what it's like, if you only see like the tangible output, it's like, yeah, we could have also done that in 1 week, the number of
Mm,
episodes, but that's not really the point. I really like the idea that time passes and we change our relationship and we change in our relationship to creativity.
yeah. Yeah.
Because I think
I
that's a
agree.
big thing we talk about
Mhm.
outside of outside of it too, is just this like, what are you making? How do I express this? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think um I was recently having a conversation with Nick and Tanya Mark, who is of Queer Spirit podcast. I think I kind of alluded to you about this,
Mm,
but it
hmm.
was super interesting to hear their process creating the podcast as well as their what I'm calling friendship practice with it, because they also are two people, who have a podcast. And there's actually a lot more going on behind it than is often seen, and I think that part of why we even want to have projects together with our friends oftentimes is because we want to learn to human better.
Mm.
We want to learn to see what it's like to be a creative person, hanging out with another creative person, and like having our creative forces shaped and altered and challenged by another person in ways that we don't get to do when we're just by ourselves, and I
Hmm.
think when I think about my podcast, meaning like Healing the Spirit, there's a quality about it that is, it's also a collaboration, but like my collaborators can't talk back at me,
Hmm.
like they're kind
Hmm.
of like this numinous entities, right? That are just kind of floating around. But when it's another human being, then I think there's this question of like, how do we be as two people with, two distinct life force, two distinct creative energies, two distinct agendas, and two distinct paths, and like two distinct bodies, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is making me think about how we recently had so another overlapping space that you and I are in is living systems and with Leah Garza.
Mm-hmm.
And we recently had an inter-cohort meetup. So this is the third cohort. And just having that space where we're checking in and it's completely unrelated to the content of the current class. It's just like, hey, let's have a space to bring up anything. And
Mm.
I can't practice that. Like, I can't practice being witness with other people without other people being there. Like,
Right.
even if I put out like you doing a solo podcast episode, it's like even if you do that, you still assume some other side,
Mm.
but it's very different when it's a live group and you're interacting with people, like very different when you're performing on stage or something.
Totally.
And I think what I've learned in my friendship with you and the ways that we go through like periods of life and the cycles of if we're like talking more frequently or not, is just kind of like how, like, why are we so obsessed with like practicing our friendship? Because that's really what it is. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have many friends where I'm like, how can I work through this? Not that I don't work through other problems with my friends, not that You know what I mean? Like
I
there's
do
just
know what
something
you
that
mean.
feels so intentional about our relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's because of probably how we met as well. Like we met
Mm,
in a space, we met at the magician's table, and I think that space was really a lot about discovering ourselves as like magical people, even though I feel
hmm
like even my definition of a magical person has shifted a lot since then. Like
hmm
it's an ever evolving definition, but there was our cohort, which was the OG Magician's Table 2021. It feels to me like most people were approaching that space with so much like open heartedness.
hmm
And there's a way in which I think with you and I, we kind of keep that going,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, we're like, can we just move this to a one-on-one?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I think when I think about our friendship, it's definitely something that's been gradual. It's definitely something that's kind of had its ups and downs, like it's very alive. Like it's a very
hmm
alive space.
And what we always notice, it's better when we're together. Like there's like these times where I might have some idea about something you're thinking, or you might have an idea about what I'm thinking, and then we talk and we're like, oh, it's all fine.
Yeah. Right.
And this is making me think about my sister and I, probably shouldn't go into this too much. We were just talking about something that happened, very
Yeah.
vague.
Yeah.
But like there are times where when you are close to people and things come up, you're like, okay, but I know them so I can have compassion for them. And then other
Mm,
people, you're like, I need distance from them so that I can
right.
have compassion for them.
Right.
But I feel like not that compassion is necessarily the goal with you and me, but I think there is some sort of like, I want to be seen and you want to
Mm,
be seen, and we
hmm.
both want to show that care for each other.
Yeah.
And we can only do that by
Hmm.
interacting.
Yeah.
And the periods of time where we don't talk, it's not like I'm like, it's all good,
Hmm.
but it's just funny because as soon as we actually get back and do it, we're just like, oh my God, that was so fun. Like I feel so alive and upbeat and maybe just a little less alone, which seems so obvious, but
Yeah.
it's really special.
Hmm. Hmm. I am in this moment thinking about something you said, Mary, pretty early on about our podcast, which was that the practice is about like moving energy, and
Mm,
through conversations, we kind of move energy around. And that has always stuck with me. I'm still figuring out what that means. I can't
mm,
presume that I know fully what that means,
mhm.
but I feel like there's something about um, like learning when to keep it in and when to share it. And like also that being a dynamic thing. Like you don't always have this like rule or like this guidebook of like this is when we share or this is when, because
Yeah.
like even with you and I, like a few days ago we were talking about like, oh, probably I shouldn't be like voice memoing you when I'm in this state. And it's like now we're able to like talk about that and even like
Yes.
voice that. And I feel like having like cultivating those relational skills over time that are really specific to the container of our friendship
Mhm.
has allowed us to more fully trust that like we both have each other's best interest in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, ugh, this is making me think of that little practice we did at some point of, I don't know how much we want to go into this, but like for myself, I will say that with relationships, like I know that some of like feeling safe with other people is just like, it's okay that I know ultimately they're going to die, and
Mm,
that's okay.
yeah, right.
And I guess to return to what you were saying about the the ways that we learn to have some, like, I don't even want to call it like boundaries or like rules for how we interact, but it's like
Mhm.
also those can still be broken. It's just like, oh, right. Oh, interesting. I learned that like by voice messaging you when I was maybe too high or something, like probably I shouldn't do that. Or also, who cares? Like, also, I can do that and I find out it's okay and that you're not like, wow, this person's such a dopey idiot. Like it's all good, but you can't know until you try. And maybe that's
Mm.
it. Is like I feel really comfortable trying with you, like
Ooh.
experimenting and playing in that way.
Yeah. Well, a little bit of context for anyone who is into human design. My profile, I'm a 3-5 profile and Mary's a 1-3 profile. And so we share that third line in common. And the third line is so much about experimentation. And I do feel like my friendships with people who have the third line in their profile tends to be very dynamic. And I do think there's something about how life is basically a series of experiments, right? And so are relationships. And we're always shifting. Like, even just thinking about who you are today, Mary, versus who you were in 2021 when I met you, you've certainly evolved. Like, there's certain things that has stayed the same, but like the evolution of who you are and the experiences that you've had shifted your relationship with me,
Hmm.
your relationship with the world. And I think um, not everybody feels safe enough to want to be in that experimentation space.
Hmm.
Like it does feel scary because I was thinking about this the other day, that I think what feels scary about experimentation is who am I going to be on the other end of it? Because
Hmm.
my brain, like as a sun and seventh house person, I'm always thinking about like, how is this going to impact my relationships? And like most of the time, I feel like as an adult, I have made the decision to only really have deep friendships and be available to people that I know I can go a certain distance with. Like otherwise, I'm just kind of like, I don't have time,
Hmm.
for better or for worse. And so I feel like the people who I call friends or partners are all people who can kind of go there with me. And so in a way, it's like, yes, if I do something, Mary might have a really strong reaction. Mary might not want to talk to me for like 3 weeks, which actually hasn't happened. But but ultimately, I wonder if what I'm afraid of is like meeting myself on the other side of it.
Hmm.
Like, who will I
Hmm.
be if I let myself take this experiment? Who will I be if I let myself try something I've never really tried before? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is making me think about things that I've feared over
Mm,
time. Uh, a couple nights ago, I dreamed about improv, and I haven't done that in a while, like since pre-COVID. But there were like 4 or 5 winters I did improv classes, and
mhm,
it was just funny to have this dream where I was like, oh, this is really fun. But there was a period of time, pretty much my entire life until I started doing that. Um, when I was 25, I think was when we did these classes. And um, the idea of it was like so resonant, but it was so like the fear was so real. But because I was afraid of it, there was this sense of like, damn it, I know it's for me. And in the same
right.
way, like certain people, you're like, I'm intimidated by you, but I also want to worship you a little bit. And also, I love you, and you're like, I don't know. Not that I would say I was like, afraid of you, but I think there was
Mm,
this thing. What as soon as we met, it was like, I think I'm going to learn something here.
mm,
And maybe this is also that 3 line thing you were talking about, or also I'm just like, I don't know, ninth house stellium
yeah.
that idea of if I can't learn something, like you were saying, if I can't go there, it's like if I can't learn something, if I don't know that I'm being challenged to come through and have something on the other side, then yeah, what's the point?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That feels vulnerable because I think there's a certain openness to being altered too, right?
Hmm.
In that
Yeah.
state. Yeah.
And I guess like to return to the improv thing for a second, it's like not that I don't still like I know if I was suddenly thrust on stage again, I would probably have some nerves or whatever. But there is that thing of I don't have that response in my body anymore. I don't have that like the hole in the pit of your stomach where you're like, oh no, I do not want to do that, but I want to do that. Like I don't have that feeling. So now when I have that arise in other stuff, where you're like, oh shit, now I know I have to do that. I don't want to
Mm.
say that I'm going to do that, which is why I'm going to say it again. This is my period of time where I'm going to get obsessed with painting. How about that?
I love that, Mary. I
Thank you,
love that.
Jonathan.
Yeah. I also, you and I have been talking about this book that I'm starting to read now, The War of Art. I think it's by
Mhm.
Stephen Pressfield, recommended to me by Michelle Pelazon. And I don't know, there's something about what he was saying in that book that was really like, ooh, like I felt it in my body, and he said something about essentially, at least how I'm understanding it, is that resistance comes up whenever there's something worth doing in
Mm,
life,
mhm.
and um, art is one of them. Making art is one of them. So I want to hear from you, Mary, in this moment. What does art making mean to you?
Mm. I think there's something about having time to pay attention. Um, because sometimes if I'm making something, like I would do these little doodles with just permanent marker mostly, or like brush markers. That's kind of mindless, but then I think in that mindlessness, you have space to notice whatever is coming up. And
Hmm.
I don't know. I think there have been periods of time where I've gotten into that phase of just being completely lost in it. And I don't know, it's funny. I'm like, can I make my gardening count as art? I think so.
Yeah, I think
Where
so.
there's like time, like I always think of this thing one of my professors said was like, what is the thing you're doing when time goes away? And
Mm.
so I guess like for me with art making, it's like, how can it be this practice like anything else where if you value it as much as like meditation or eating food, like it's like it has to be, it's like that podcast with Amanda and Beth Pickens, right?
Hmm. That's right.
Um where she talks about Beth Pickens talks about you need to think of your art as like as necessary as drinking water or brushing your
Yeah.
teeth or any of those things like that. To me, I think maybe I just like couldn't see I couldn't see the necessity of it, but I see over time when I don't do it,
Mm.
the lack or like the bitterness, I suppose, to use the projector speak or
Yeah.
something.
Right.
Like those things, like that frustration that arises when you don't have that outlet, because sometimes you can skate by and think that you're fine,
Hmm.
but I'm I'm I guess experimenting with that idea that like
Hmm.
how can this be as necessary as anything else, because I don't want it to be something I like brush off or negotiate away because there's more practical stuff I could be doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
or or even that like thing we were saying the other day about making bad art and just like that's fine. You can just not Virgo fifth house it. which is great that I have a Virgo rising friend to talk about that with, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, even like making bad art, like what's helpful for me. So, just for context, when we were
You know, we're
talking
just
about
always
making,
self-referencing
I
our
know.
own. We're like, so remember that time when we were talking about, sorry, just
Yes,
go.
exactly. Um, so, making bad art is a very simple practice. It's essentially like this idea of can you just sit down for a predetermined amount of time and then just make something, right? Like it doesn't, and actually even maybe purposefully making it bad, you know? And I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, I remember at some point, maybe like last summer, the summer before, you were talking to me about making bad songs.
Mhm.
And so I only did it for like 5 days, but I was like, oh, I can do 5 minutes of a really dumb song about my cat,
Yep.
RIP.
Yep. Oh,
Um,
Antoine.
oh, that's a thing we can talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, and that it's like also having those like super short bursts of time to
Hmm.
be like, I can do something really bad in 5 minutes. I could do something
Mm.
even worse in three.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
But then you
Yeah.
did it,
Yeah. And
and
then,
over time,
and
you
over
have
time, you
something.
have something, right? Exactly. Exactly. And also, I think even like for me, it's actually helpful to be like, I'm going to make bad art for a certain amount of time and then it's going to become good. You know, like because of
Mm.
my Capricorn fifth house, I'm going to be
Mhm.
like, I will show you what improvement can look like.
Because if you start this bad, it doesn't take much to improve either.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And I think, um, I really like what you were saying earlier about like, I think you were creating this connection with what Beth Pickens was saying about like the necessity of art to keep artists or artist types sane, you know, and like maintain a certain level of health. I was telling you earlier about this. I started recommitting to waking up and like singing first thing in the morning.
Mm.
And for the past 4, almost 5 years, Mary, my morning practice has been mostly meditation and has been mostly energy work, right? Like clearing things with my mind, imagination, spirit, whatever. And I have to say, starting the day with singing has done all of the things that my energy work practice usually
Mhm.
does.
Mhm.
And actually, I feel like I end up having better boundaries with people in conversations. Like, just
Mm.
there's this like natural boundary that comes from me checking in and essentially letting a really deeply essential part of me know that, like, you matter, you know? Like,
Mhm.
the singer me matters to me. And so then I bring this self to all my interactions and it just results in better relationships overall. Like I don't feel
Mhm.
like I'm carrying around other people's energies and things like that because I am being me. I'm being really authentic. And like is there a better way to do boundary work or protection work than like being your authentic self, you know?
Mhm. And the energy of just singing, like physically, what that does. And because aren't we both open throat
Yeah.
people? It's funny that this feels like such a human design podcast when I
Yeah.
learned 98% of it from you. I'm only as good as my teacher.
I'm even
Um,
still like learning, so yeah.
but yeah, like whenever, well, even right before this, I'm like, okay, I'll just put on an Adele song and like sing
Mm,
that super loud
yeah.
because it is like there's like such a quick thing to center yourself and know like this is who I am and that like even if it's not you're not like in a chorus of people or
Mm,
whatever, but even just for your own like practice of expression. But it sounds
yeah.
so like starting the day that way.
It's
It's
so great.
interesting, like this thing of, oh, well, of course, starting my day with meditation is like the best way. Like, who? what could be better? And
Hmm.
not I don't know, meditation or singing can be meditation for sure, of
It
course.
is. Yeah.
And yeah, maybe this is the other theme that's been arising is this sense of the practices that we've had have served us, but now it's time to like fine tune them or pivot to some
Mm.
other thing that's like, this was a good placeholder. And now I know like this framework for my day. I actually
Yeah.
like, I think the first thing is just realizing I should start my day doing something consistently,
Hmm.
whatever it
Hmm.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the realization maybe, Mary, that we can fine tune our practices to fit our most pressing desires at any given moment.
Mm-hmm,
Like
mm-hmm.
what I'm hearing from you at the beginning of this conversation, throughout this conversation, is how you truly desire to paint at this moment in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like that being like this genuine desire that is wanting to come through you. And I think that sometimes part of the challenge is that our idea of daily practice has been so entangled in like wellness industry philosophies. And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like if you want to sell a meditation app, then you need to tell people that they need to start their day meditating, right? You know? I mean, and I don't think that's like wrong, right? Because I did meditate first thing in the morning for a long time, and that was amazing for me. Like I
Yeah,
really needed
yeah,
that. But
yeah.
but then there comes a time where maybe I need to personalize it or I need to shift it and
Well,
say
just as
more.
you're saying this, I just was like, well, this is what we were saying about our friendship too. Is like,
Yeah.
yes, I've established this rule, I've established this protocol for how we engage,
Mhm.
but actually, it's totally okay to break those rules, or it's
Mhm.
okay to change your mind.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a huge, I mean, Saturn life thing is it's just okay to pivot. Thank
Yes.
God for your mutability because that really does help. Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm your guest, so I can do anything
Of
here.
course. Of
Um,
course.
well, I was
Interrupt.
thinking about like why. So, okay, for context, my cat, who was 2 years and around 4 months old, I was away, at a meditation retreat in Switzerland, and he got sick, and we learned later he had lymphoma, and he died while I was away. So like this whole thing of starting your day, it's like I only had this cat for 2 years,
Mm.
but every day you're like, I know what I need to do in the morning because someone has just told me what I need to do. I need to go feed him and refresh his water. And then we need to like have and then, going to sleep. There's also the routine like, you're going to crawl over my partner's head. You're going to land on my neck. We're going to do this thing for a while until you move on.
Mhm.
And that, especially like morning and night, oh, man, that's the hardest thing is just
Mm.
this like disruption to what was so like ingrained in my day to day.
Yeah.
And so, like, I've just been thinking about how much this creature has taught me
Mm.
in that like daily routine that even like he and I had this little dynamic that became so much a part of my life. And I never really understood that until I had a pet as an adult.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know.
Mhm.
That just feels really present to bring up
Yeah.
in this thing around routine and practice. And yeah, like I didn't know all that time like he and I were like practicing.
Mhm. Right. Right. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thanks, Jonathan.
He's such a
It's
beautiful cat.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know,
Mhm.
like pretty much every night I'm just like, damn, can that
Mhm.
not be real? Like I don't know, but I do
Yeah.
feel like I've joined this club in a
Mm.
way.
Of
Like
like people who have had their pets pass away.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I love grief. Like I hate it, of course, but it's fascinating. It's clarifying.
Yeah.
It's infinitely universal.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um and yeah, well, also, because the other thing that I'm gonna share while I'm
Uh-huh.
talking about Antoine is because one thing that you brought up about
Mm.
possibly talking about is my practice with Tara,
Mm-hmm.
the female Buddha,
Yeah.
mother of all Buddhas, which is convenient because yesterday was Mother's Day. Um,
Mm.
but I was at this initiation without going into too long about all of that. It was the teacher of my teacher. My teacher is Rachel Wooten, and she wrote a book
Mm-hmm.
about Tara. And so this Tibetan Rinpoche, he was giving these initiations, and to find out that Antoine was sick while I was there was like, okay, well, this is good. If I'm not home, at least I'm in this place with a lot of support. And then for him to die and
Mm.
have all of these people, like it was so terrible, but I could not have practiced that experience of sharing my grief with all these people, or like for them to so generously just support me in that. That couldn't have happened if
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't been in that space. And to learn that it was, yeah, just like a really beautiful way to like, and what little cat, like, I just keep thinking, like, how could you have been a luckier cat that you had
Mm.
this Tibetan Rinpoche praying for your soul on the way, and all of
Yeah.
these countless people too, like, because they have their groups and they're like, oh, I'll add it to the list of the pets that we pray for. And like,
Mm.
you don't know all the support that's there.
Yeah.
And it took so much off of me to think, like, of course, it would have been great if I was home, but if I had been home, I would not have been so blessed to learn the support that's there, that we hear
Yeah.
about in theory, that we
Mm-hmm.
read about, like, oh, support is there, or whatever. And especially in this time where, like, you and I, our friendship is virtual. How many good
Mm-hmm.
friends I have that it's awesome to have online friendships, but that physical thing of just
Mm.
like sobbing in front of all these people and like
Yeah. Yeah.
having them all come up and hug me.
Mm.
And yeah, it was just wild, but like so cool.
Yeah. 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 As I'm hearing you speak, I'm also noticing the thread of like the intensity of that experiment sometimes. Like you don't really know, right? A, what's going to happen, B, what any sort of cocktail of various situations happening all at once is going to teach you, you know?
Mhm,
Like there's kind of a, yeah, surprising quality to it,
mhm,
you know? And it's like all these unexpected things that arise as a consequence of moments of grief, and
mhm,
one thing leads to another, but you can never really know what it's leading to
mhm.
until that's being shown to you. Hmm.
Yeah. And even, before I left for this trip, I'm like looking at the astrology. Oh,
Mm,
interesting. Jupiter is going to be on my moon. And
right.
like, in some ways, well, this is also like, how do I want to view this? Do I want to view this as when we hear something like, oh, abundance or there's gifts? It's like, yeah, there is a gift because as you know, value lessons and learning, but that's not fun. But it doesn't
Hmm.
mean that it's not a gift.
Right.
And also, this is so interesting because Antoine, I wanted his name to be something more celestial. I was like, fine, his middle name will be Jupiter. And so then for Jupiter to be on my moon at that time, it's just, yeah, it was such like, you can't make that shit up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you
Wow.
can, but
Yeah. Yeah. I remember this, but I feel like in the intensity of like whatever was happening in the moment and the different conversations we were having about Antoine passing suddenly, I feel like that was really not like at the top of my mind until you brought it up just now. But here's an unpopular opinion. I think Jupiter transits can be terrifying.
It's terrible. I don't recommend it.
I don't
Personally,
either.
this
I've
year
had some
sucks.
really intense. I have a beef with like the astrological culture, I feel like, because I feel that sometimes we rush towards wanting to interpret things
Mm.
when actually, like, the intensity of having to live through whatever we're interpreting, it's like, it, you can't joke around with that, man. You know?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like intense shit. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
that I don't know. There's always, for me, when I'm in the middle of something, like say it's like this major life event, like, oh, my best friend is getting married,
Mm,
or, I graduated college, or whatever, like this thing that feels so major, that in some ways it looks like that's the interpretation. You're like, oh, that's the event that happened. But really, for me, like lately, and with this grief, just feeling like I'm coming out of my skin. And it is that same sort of feeling of like
right.
molting.
Yeah.
I'm emerging on the other side of this thing, but having, worked around a lot of sea creatures and seeing like lobsters and crabs that had recently molted, it's like then you're in this super vulnerable, tender spot. So, like, the
Mm,
last thing you need to do is then decide what to do next. It's like you
right.
just have to protect yourself. It's
Right.
like when anybody's in grief, and I feel like this whole 2024 just kind of like thumbs down. Honestly,
Mm,
not a huge fan. I'm not. But the the thing you need to do, you can't be like, I have to exercise. I have to, and maybe that is how you deal with grief. And in
uh-huh.
which case, like, awesome, good for you. But like if
Mm,
you're in that space where you're like, I just need to remember to eat, like that's awesome.
mm,
So what? You might later get to a point, which I also similarly feel, where you're like, God, I really need a reset. And luckily, I went to this Tibetan thing where we were
mm,
eating really delicious food.
mhm,
And it forced me to like, my little job while I was there was prepping vegetables, which I love. And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot I like this. But if I hadn't been in that place where that was just like a structured thing and also my food was figured out for me, like I wouldn't have been eating
mm,
really good vegetarian food. I
mhm,
would have been like, I don't know, maybe eating cereal, forgetting to eat, like doing it begrudgingly.
mhm,
And anyway, I guess my point in saying all this is just like, you just have to get through it. Like, you can't come out of your little shell and then expect to like put your like spears up to try to defend anything. It's like, no, you need to like go in your little cave until you
mm.
can build that strength up again.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. And I think it's making me think too about how with Jupiter, people don't tend to talk about Jupiter in this way, but I think about Jupiter as being connected to Zeus as well. And Zeus is like this thunder god, right? And it's like, what happens once you get struck by lightning? You know? Like, you gotta tend to that. And like, yeah, you can interpret, have all these interpretations about like being, Jupiter being the teacher and things like that. And I think that's true. I do
Mhm.
think Jupiter is like this guru figure, right? But also sometimes the lessons are really painful and really crazy and turns your life upside down, and you may not want to think about what the lessons might be for a while, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think about, you know, going to college or something. At the time, you think, oh, my major is what I've learned. But even at the time, I was like, I'm not really proud that I graduated. I'm mostly just aware that I could have done better.
Mm.
But now that time has passed, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Like, good
Yeah.
job, younger
Right.
self. But at
Right.
the time, if I had just been summing it up by thinking, like, what did I learn? What were the outcomes? Like, check that off the list.
Mm.
Then I would and was like disappointed in the outcome because I was
Mm.
judging it too soon. And
Mhm.
maybe that's like the thing is not concluding anything too quickly, like especially
Yeah.
when it's this big shift.
Right. Right. This is making me think, Mary, about something you've often said to me, which is um, in various kind of shades of complaining and commiserating, you always say, my process is so slow. So I guess I'm curious to hear more about this experience of
Hmm.
being aware of the slowness of your process and also, yeah, what you've learned from that, having that awareness as it's happening.
I kind of want to cry, just putting that out there.
Mm,
Because I think what I'm realizing about why the slowness is scary is that like when you're somebody who's very aware of like anything can happen at any moment, like nothing's guaranteed, you're like, I don't want to be this urgent person. Trust me,
mm,
I'm really not. Like, I'm just like, take it easy. But you're like, if I don't get better at this quicker, I'm gonna die before I can accomplish anything in my life. So, like, that's
mm,
hard.
mm,
And I don't know, maybe that sounds really dramatic to put it so uh starkly. I don't
mm,
know.
mhm,
But the slowness, I think, because of, for example, bread or other, yeah, like singing or something. Like singing is a thing that I've never, well, I guess there was a period of time I did do voice lessons in college for fun, but like I've never chosen to make that a practice
mm,
in that way, like now in a more conscious way, like as an adult. But that's something that's just like always been present in my life as a thing that would like naturally
mhm.
serve me.
Yeah.
But yeah, but then when I think of something like bread, where I was like, okay, I want to get good at this, but it also means you're going to make a lot of shit and just be okay that this is not going to be good and it's going to be embarrassing. Or maybe
Yeah.
you're just going to want to throw it away and not let anybody see it. Or you're not going to like put a crumb shot on fucking Instagram.
Mhm.
Oh God, I could talk a lot about breadstagram because that shit pisses me off too. If you want to know, which I don't think we've ever talked about. Like, have we?
I don't think so.
Oh God, it's like so many people who started baking during the pandemic, which I'm glad. Good for you. Go people baking or making anything at home. That's great.
Mhm.
I'm so
Mhm.
proud. But
Mhm.
also like as much as I think bread is life-changing, and it is, it's also just like nothing is the cure-all for everything. So just
Yeah.
chill out.
Yeah.
So I guess to go back to my own point about that is like you just have to do it a ton of times and just don't decide where it ends or don't decide too quickly. I think that's what
Mm.
it is about like
Mm.
being slow. You get tempted, especially in a world where everything is about like, what's the outcome? Like, how can
Mhm.
I get results? If I
Yeah.
participate in this lecture, like, what am I going to leave with? If I use you as a teacher, like, what are the 10 helpful things? Like, fuck all that. Like,
Mhm.
just if it's a thing that your future self will look back and be like, oh, I'm so glad I did that, then, like, then it's for you
Yeah. Yeah.
and you just have to do a little over and over again and not freak out. And I am completely saying this to myself because there are many things where it feels like, is it going anywhere? But then you look back and you're like, oh my God, I've got a stack of paper that's like 2 feet
Mhm.
tall. And I wrote all of that. Like, that's
Yeah.
pretty good.
Yeah.
You can't deny that when you visually, like, maybe it's also as like a very Taurus person, like, there's something about
Mhm.
like the material
Evidence.
uh, yeah, evidence.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
I don't know. Did that answer what you want?
I think so. Yeah, what I'm hearing is trusting the process. I mean, this is interesting maybe to talk to a Taurus rising about. Part of pleasure is slowing down your excitement enough to be able to become aware that you are feeling pleasure. But I don't know.
Hmm.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, this makes me think about when people have approaches to like going to a restaurant and you're like,
Mm,
I'm gonna find the best rated
mm,
whatever. But sometimes if you're just on vacation and you stumble in somewhere, you're like, I never would have found this. And then you just happen to enjoy it and it was amazing. But like somewhere in the expectations and somewhere in the projections you have about what your experience is going to be,
yeah.
you're like not even in that enjoyment or you're not even in that experience. Actually, yeah, I guess that's the first thing. It's like you can't enjoy something if you haven't actually experienced it first.
Mm,
You're like, I'm going to enjoy this right now. It's like, well, that doesn't work that way. It's, if somebody like handed you this plate of delicious food, but you're like, God,
mm,
I'm just not hungry yet. Like, I really want to enjoy this, but then you feel like you have to munch down this delicious food that should be really good,
yeah.
but you're not receptive. Like you're not in a
Mm-hmm.
state to receive it either. And so like,
Mm,
oh, I know what I was going to say because it's like it goes back to you're already deciding where it ends. Like you're already
mm-hmm.
looking for the outcome before you've
Mm-hmm.
even experienced it,
Yeah.
which is you can't know. You might think
Mm-hmm.
you'll know how it feels, but like even on a given day, like your practice where you're like, oh, meditation, that's always going to hit the spot. It's like, whoa, I didn't even expect that if I started my day a little differently, that would really do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're already deciding that this is the only way, or like, if I do this, then well, it's like, then I'll be happy. If I
Mm-hmm.
get X, Y, and Z, then I'll
Yeah.
be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like I guess before you can even talk about pleasure, you just have to like be there. Because I guess, we
Totally.
talk so much about like embodiment and blah,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah, but like we don't have to say all this fancy shit. It's just like actually noticing
Yeah.
that you're alive in a body that can do things.
Right. Right. Exactly. Well, I do notice that the idea of experimentation continue to come back to this conversation for
Mhm.
whatever reason. Like that
Mhm.
feels to me like the thread through everything we've been talking about. We've been talking about like the unexpectedness of things that happen in our lives, experimenting with friendship as like people who continue to change over time, like the evolution of our practice. Um, I guess my question for you is, what do you see as the connection between experimenting and like making art? And maybe more precisely, is it possible? It, is making art basically just experimenting?
Yeah, I mean, right? That's
I
kind
think.
of, to me, it's like, well, especially if it's a medium that you haven't used a lot. Part of it is just like learning to hold a pencil or something. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to know what it does. But sometimes when something is just kind of seemingly random with a lot of time that's passed, you can like look back on it and be like, oh, that is art in quotes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but at the time it doesn't look like anything.
Mm.
And yeah, it definitely brings up that thing again with the deciding too soon, or also like when you're practicing something and you're like, oh, this is bad or this doesn't look right,
Mm-hmm.
and you're only focused on that, then you can't see all the things that were right about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, okay, so this is what's coming up for me right now as you were speaking, that I think that art making as experimentation is one orientation among many. Like, I think there are
Mm.
other ways to orient towards making art that is
Or
equally
like,
valid.
so would you say, now that I'm thinking about this, expressing or like self-expression or
Mm,
expressing some idea, because then that seems less, well, okay. So this my reason for bringing this up is there was an article in the last week or so that my nephew was in. My nephew's
mm,
a skateboarder,
mhm,
and the reporter was talking about um I can't remember what their question was, but Gabriel, my nephew, said something about how like skateboarding changes the way you see the world because you look at things and you think, oh, I could skate on that. But really, it's not just about like competitions. It's not about winning everything. It's just finding ways to express myself. And I'm putting this on him, but like his body, like his embodiment of being a human is through the act of skateboarding.
yeah.
And I don't know, there was something about it where I was like, holy shit, skateboarding as ontology.
Mm,
Yeah, like that's cool to
mhm,
think about because you do see the world through some different lens.
mhm,
And just that, yeah, like there are so many ways that we are expressing ourselves that people who think they're not an artist, like you are making stuff all the time. No matter
mm,
what you're doing, your life, however slow it seems, even if you don't have like paintings or music or you're not making something in that way, like there's so much more being created than
right,
you see.
right, right. Exactly. I think you're reminding me of something I like to say, which is that we all have the agency to create something at any given
Mhm.
moment, you know?
Mhm.
And
And in any given moment, we already have like everything
right.
that was created for you and me to be sitting here.
Hmm.
It's not just, oh, we made this plan and we're here. It's like
Mm,
our parents a long time ago in the late 80s created things, but all those people who created before them.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, I'm curious if you have anything else you want to talk about that maybe I haven't brought up in this conversation for us.
One thing that I was thinking about is being a reader.
Mm,
Um, how over time these little check-ins of maybe also depending on the frequency of offering readings or receiving readings from people too, like I don't know, over time, how where are you at with that in your
mm.
practice or your experimenting with being a reader or a teacher?
Ooh.
But maybe those are two distinct. Let's just say reader because I'm thinking like
Mm.
one-on-one.
Yeah. I'm landing at a spot where I usually land after I've been experimenting with something for a while, Mary, which is I feel like I just know the limits of the thing better. And I think so there are
Mm,
two things. One is I feel like I am much more aware of like the various kinds of readings I'm able to give to people. And sometimes it's very subtle. Like nobody's asking me to like read a certain way for them, but based on
mm,
the person's inquiry, based on the person's body language, even sometimes based on the person's receptivity in the moment, I notice myself like in this mercurial way, like tweaking ever so slightly. Like what I like to say to folks nowadays is I can just read your chart or read the cards or read the Akashic records or whatever. I can be a consultant meaning I tell you what to do, right? I tell you what I think you should do. Or I can be a coach, right? I can
Mm.
help you find out what it is that you need. And I've been adding a fourth, which is I can just be your cheerleader. Like it's actually not
Oh.
like I've been learning to investigate and like break down some of the shame around like how sometimes people come to you purely needing encouragement. I've
Mhm.
I've seen this in myself too. Like when I'm thick in the creative process,
Yeah.
sometimes all I need is someone to tell me like, you know what? You're onto something here. You're doing a great job. Keep going.
Hmm. And it's
Sometimes that
almost,
is all you need.
yeah, and it's almost sad that if somebody can't vocalize that, or like if it's not laid out as kind of an option, not just in your readings, but in life, to be like,
Hmm.
oh, I could just ask for that.
Yeah.
Like I didn't even know that was an option.
Yes.
And like it's sad that if I am thinking like, oh, I really want to connect with this person, but like maybe this like little section of the hour that we have together, they'll hit on that. But how important it is to just know why you're even going for a reading at all. And also that like
Mm,
naturally, that is such a gift that you already have and
mm,
provide anyway. I don't
mm.
know. All of this just sounded so like Saturn moving through your seventh house.
Yes. Exactly, Mary. Exactly. And I think um for me, especially that fourth role of like just being someone's cheerleader, right? And like
Mm.
in a genuine way, like really
Mhm, mhm.
reflecting back to a person what I see they're doing and what is good about what they're doing, right? What is worthy and what is um, helpful, life promoting in what they're doing in the web of life in general. Um, I think it's also helped me reparent my inner artist child in a way.
Mm.
Because back to what you were saying earlier about people not even knowing they needed that, I found that usually the people who need it the most don't know they need it.
Mm.
And it's actually the job of the reader or the mentor to notice that. To
Yeah.
be like, I see that maybe this is something you've never received. Not so directly, right? But kind of in
Yeah,
your
like
own way.
you look desperate.
But it's like I think we all have experienced that at some point, right? We wanted to
Yeah,
do something and
yeah,
then our parents like don't do it, right? And maybe they
yeah.
don't even have any bad intentions, but maybe they just
Hmm.
don't want us to do it in that moment. And then we are like, I can't do this forever and ever, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, having been the recipient of the off the clock, off the reading, cheerleading, um, it really just seems like getting compensated for showing up as the person you already are, which
Mm.
is kind of the goal,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
not thinking, oh, if people are coming to me, I need to give them what I think they might want. It's like,
Mm.
well, if they're attracted to me and resonate with me, then we're already a match in some way,
Hmm.
you know? Like I don't have
Exactly.
to guess what that is. I could actually just like be present with it.
Yes. Yes, exactly. What have you learned about readings, Mary?
Mm. I know it's funny because I'm like, I haven't really, I mean, I'll do them. I was just thinking, are we going to talk about our friend Rebecca at one point? It's like Rebecca's like probably the only person I repeatedly give readings to, and you.
Ah,
Um,
yes, I come to you.
but yeah, I think I am more at a place where I want to, I don't want to say that I want to put that out there, not like with painting. I don't want to be like, I want to be getting tons more readings, though it wouldn't hurt. Because I think I am happy when I do it.
Yeah,
Like I think I enjoy it when I do it.
yeah,
And yeah, but hmm, that's a good question. I think it's just a good reminder that I have something valuable to offer, because I often think, I don't know, the stuff that I'm doing is just for myself,
Mm.
or like just so that I stay somewhat sane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But even in conversations that aren't like official readings, there is still that like, oh, I have retained some information. I do have things that, not just to tell people what they should do or whatever, but it's just like these are all expanding our vocabularies, and that helps us, like these modes of, how do you want to say that? Like whatever it is, if it's astrology or the Akashic records or anything like that, like all of these mm, other forms help us connect with people.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, like that's kind of the goal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To not forget like that we're in this whole thing together.
Mm. Oh, I feel like I really see your Aquarius sun there. Um,
uh,
so lovely. And also, I feel like everybody should get a reading from Mary. You're one of the
oh,
few people that I recommend when I can't do readings for people for whatever reason. I'm like, go to Mary. Hmm.
well, I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
know it's
Highly
fun
recommend.
to do. Thank you, Jonathan. I have recommended you as well. I find
I know you
you
have.
like quite good. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, where can people find you, Mary? As we're wrapping up this conversation, I want you to talk about all the ways that people can find you.
Mm. I know it's
Yeah,
2024, the year I make a website. I don't know. Just find me on Instagram. Find me on my podcast with Jonathan.
yeah, yeah, that
Yeah,
too.
which actually I have a question before we're done here. I'm like,
Hmm.
how do you feel our podcast has it in like the practice of our podcast,
Mm.
has that impacted the practice of your own podcast?
Big time. I would say so. Yeah,
Hmm.
in a huge way. Um, I think that in general, our friendship, but maybe more directly, our podcast has helped me see aspects of myself that I didn't think was worth seeing and therefore was worth sharing, Mary. And
Hmm.
it's like I think there's this part of me that's like more candid. Like I wouldn't even go as far as saying that I'm more silly. But I think it's like maybe there's a way in which like my Gemini moon kind of comes out more when I'm with you. Like I feel un unconcerned about whether people can follow us.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
I
what
know.
it is about
Well,
your presence, but like I'm so aware when I'm in front of you that like, you know what, if somebody's listening to us and they don't like it, they can just pause or they can just move on to another podcast. Like there's a certain sense of like agency that I think I feel with you
mm,
that you've taught me just through your presence, you know, and
mm,
and through the openness that you have with just your way of being that I think has actually really changed the way that I show up on my podcast. And I think people can probably track this if they listen to very, very early
mm,
episodes. Like if they listen
mm.
to like some of the first interviews, which I edited like a crazy person. Like I used to spend like 3 to 4 hours editing each episode. And then also if you listen to some of the earlier contemplations too, I feel like um yeah, I think that our podcast together, My Life is Better with You in It, that is, has helped me. And even like the last conversation we had with Leah Garza and
And Dana.
Dana Baliki was really like, I was like, wow, I didn't realize I could record a conversation like that and then share it, you know?
Yeah.
And like be
Yeah.
okay with that being out there. Cause that was a very raw conversation.
Yeah.
Like it was so real.
Hmm.
You know, like
And because
within
it
the first
felt,
10 minutes.
yeah. And especially from where we all came at that day,
Yeah.
just the
Mhm.
sense of truly being ourselves. And maybe that's
Yeah.
why, like, throughout this conversation, like, I'm self-conscious about being self-conscious. And I'm
Hmm.
like,
Which is fine
I
too. Like, I
don't,
think that's
well, and
part
it's
of the
like,
work
that's
too.
also fine too. But it's
Yeah.
so funny because I'm like, I don't actually feel like this about me with you. It's
Yeah.
more like, I don't know. This is just so funny, but I also have absolutely no chill around not bringing it up. That's yet another thing that we can disseminate that I
Yeah.
could just wait until later, but no.
Yeah.
Like it just like there's something about like being together where it just like draws out the question.
Yeah.
Like, is this fine? Like, is this okay for
Exactly.
you?
Exactly. And I think that's also part of relationality, actually, right?
Mhm.
That, like, we do show care to one another, and sometimes we also care for ourselves through showing care to one another, you know?
Mhm.
Like sometimes I'm like, is that okay, Mary? Because I'm kind of a little shaky about it, and I want to
Yeah. Like,
solicit
actually,
some
no.
reassurance, right?
Good, because
uh,
I wasn't okay either. Yeah, that's so true.
yeah.
This was really fun.
Yeah, this has been really fun. How about it for you? How has our podcast shifted you or
Mm,
your
mm,
projects in some
hmm
ways?
Yeah, I think it's yet again in this recurring theme of really appreciating those check-ins
Mm.
and seeing like where we were at the very beginning and also some of the stuff that we talked about at the very beginning. Like I didn't want to return to that because I
Mm.
feel like we had so much like there was just so much possibility, but then it was
Yeah.
like, okay, back to the practice.
Mm.
And so maybe there's some of that that might be fun to return to, even if
Mhm.
that's not what we then end up doing with it. It's
Mhm.
like we're always in relationship with that. But yeah, I think like I appreciate having the opportunity to do something with you anyway, just like because I love hanging out with you.
Me too.
But yeah, like it feels like I feel very blessed. Just like I don't know. I'm like I'm so lucky I get to do this with my friend. Like not everybody gets to do that. And
Mm.
that's pretty cool. And I think it's taught us a lot about projections maybe
Mhm. Mhm.
and expectations and things that I learn with you that I don't learn with my other main life partner.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm. Oh, that's sweet. Um, yeah, it's also reminding me of how even in that first cohort of Magician's Table, I think Mariola and Megan Fry are also still
Yeah.
doing stuff together. So
Yeah,
it's
like
really cute that,
currently, like they're in
yeah, they're
Greece
doing
like this
Greece
next week, I
stuff.
think. Yeah,
Yeah. So, a little
that's
shout out
sweet.
to Britain for bringing us together in
hmm
whatever ways.
hmm Yeah. Which is like that's another reminder about that, like the resonance of a certain energy at a certain time,
Hmm.
cross the paths of certain people.
Yeah.
And then like it's just okay to like see what arises and then certain things stick and certain things don't and
Yeah.
like it's all just part of it.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
hmm
Well, thank you, Mary. I really appreciate you. This has been such an incredible conversation, I think. And I can't wait to have you back. And I can't wait to be on our podcast as well very soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. This was super fun. I love hanging out with you.
I love hanging out with you. Thank you.